welcome to the next panel for the Galaxy's Greatest 45 Years of 2000 AD. And if there was ever a panel to call legends, it's this one, because I am joined by four of the biggest names ever to work for 2000 AD. And it's an absolute privilege to welcome them all. We're going to talk about their individual careers, their work for 2000 AD, what 2000 AD means to them, and their careers after. But we'll start off by saying hello to them individually. So first of all, hello to Mick McMahon.
Hello.
Hello, Mick.
And he's joined by Brian Bolland.
Hello.
The artist.
University Challenge.
Huh?
I've been on the beginning of University Challenge.
Should have given you all buzzers, and then you can look up at each other like on the young ones. He's known professionally as Frank Quitely, but it's an honour to welcome Vincent Deegan.
Hello, Vince.
Hi.
And technically he's Mark Simpson, but everyone calls him Jock. Hiya, Jock.
Hey.
Hello, Jock.
So thank you all for taking part in this. Like I said, it's a fantastic privilege to have you all on the same panel together. Not just because of your achievements, your careers, you know, the prominence of your work, but also because I thought it was a perfect way to illustrate how 2000 AD has changed. You know, the different kind of generations of artists who've come up and made a big impact outside of 2000 AD's pages. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about each of your different routes into 2000 AD. Mick, let's explain. You were a fresh-faced young man when
you still is.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you came at 2000 AD?
Well, I'd left art school and I'd gone to see a guy at Battle Picture Library, the editor, Ben Bensberg, I think his name was. I know it's definitely Bensberg, I'm not sure about the first name, but he sent me around the corner to Temple Art Agency, who took me on. And for a year, I didn't really do much. They got me some jobs with DC Thompson. We're going to do a sci-fi comic because they'd heard rumours, the way these things used to work then, that they'd have to copy each other's comics. So I did a few bits and pieces for that. But then I saw a Paul Neri strip in, I think it was Eerie or something, Warren magazine. And I thought, well, I'd like to try and do something like that, because it didn't turn out anything like that. But I showed that to Temple, and they took it around to 2000 AD. And on the strength of that, I think Pat put me on for Judge Dredd. So.
Can I jump in? But 2000 AD didn't exist when you first started, did it? I thought you were in number one, Prog 1.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they had to do some stuff to put in the first issue before it existed.
I suppose so.
We don't.
There had to be something for you to put your work in, I guess. And that was
2000. That was it. With Pat, they was just starting it, weren't they? For whatever reason, I've never understood why Carlos couldn't draw it, but so they needed someone else to draw it. So they asked me. And just lucky because I brought that new sample in, which I don't think what I'd done before would have got me the work.
Mick, when you did that, because is it true that they essentially asked you to ape Carlos's look?
Yeah, I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they did. Yeah. And of course, look, because I was so young and stupid, you look at it and you think there's nothing to this, is there? Look, it's just squiggly lines, and it's just. And then as more and more you look at it, you think, Jesus. What am I going to try? And I think the first couple I did weren't far off it, but I couldn't keep it up because it's so difficult. And then especially when issue 5 had a strip by Carlos Dredd, the one about the giant monkey, and that was so good. I sort of totally lost my confidence then, and I was sort of scrabbling around, didn't know what to do with it really. But it still looked a bit like him, I think, because they have those lumpy bits he puts around the outside. So if you put a few of them in, you can't go wrong, really. You can't wait cards.
I mean, that is a hell of a tall order, asking somebody, essentially straight out of art school, that there's this guy who's like the most popular artist on Battle. We draw like him.
I know, yeah. Well, well, like I said, you've got to be young and stupid enough to think, yeah, I can do that, instead of looking at it thinking, oh, I don't think that's for me. But I mean, obviously, I wanted to get some work, didn't I, as well? So it worked out in the end. So.
How long was it before you felt that you'd kind of got your feet under the table, as it were? Because, you know, the comic is like you were in, first book was in Prog 2, which is when Judge Dredd started. How long was it before you went, actually, this is a productive thing that's going to be bringing me more work?
It was probably when, because the sort of editorial staff above sort of Pat and Kelvin and that hated my work, and they kept telling them to get rid of McMahon, right? And so Pat told me, he said they want to get rid of you, but I'm going to park you in the annual, right, for a few weeks, and then they'll forget about that and go on to something else, and I'll bring you back. So I thought, well, if he's got that sort of faith in me, then, you know, this might go all right. So, and that's what I did. I did one of those annual things where it is coloured in, they've got one colour, and it was orange.
Orange, the kind of black and white and orange look.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, and that's what I did for a while. And also, I think I did some illustrations for a text story. I think that might have been then or later on. Get a bit mixed up about that stuff. But so but then I came back, and like he said, they'd gone on to something else to hate. So I was able to just carry on then. So.
That's fascinating. Considering, you know, you've gone on to be one of the definitive Judge Dredd artists for editorial. I don't like this new whippersnapper. He's not up to snuff.
Well, I don't know what. Well, I suppose it was a bit sort of too. It wasn't very slick, was it? Really, because they were used to I think they used lots of Argentinian and Spanish artists who had a kind of a house style, which was some nice brushwork and things that they were used to looking at. So I don't know, really. You know, it's perhaps they're just in a bad mood or something. I don't know.
But your work evolved away from Carlos quite soon, didn't it? I mean, we were all
you couldn't keep it up. I mean, it's so because Carlos, I think he could do like 6 pages a day, couldn't he?
Yeah, I know.
And I was struggling to do like 6 a fortnight. So
yeah.
Brian, what about you? Because we had you on. We had you both on the 2000 AD podcast. I think the year before last with Dave Gibbons.
Was it as long ago as that? The year before last.
I think. What is time?
What is time? Yeah. I thought it was last year.
It might have been last year. Who knows?
What do you want to know? What do you want to know?
But I think we kind of boiled it down to a particular. Was it a UCAC? Or one of the comic smarts in the 1970s, where like everybody there.
It was a 1972 comic convention in the Waverley Hotel on Southampton Row. Did I say 72 already? And that's where I sort of met all the people in the fan world that I'd heard of previously, including Dave Gibbons and loads of other people were there. Terry Gilliam was there, I think, and Bob Monkhouse, who was a comedian, was there.
Wow.
And I think Nick Landau organised it, and he went on to open Forbidden Planet, the shop. So I knew Dave, and after my college years, I did a bit of advertising work, and then me and Dave, I think Dave had an agent called Barry Coker, Barden Press Features, and they got us doing a thing called Power Man for 2 years, Dave and me. But Dave left it to jump in on, and I think this was Prog 1 of 2000 AD. He was in number 1, wasn't he, Dave?
Yeah, on Harlem Heroes.
Harlem Heroes. And you started in number 2, Mick, did you?
That's right, yes.
I got that bit wrong, didn't I? Yeah. So that's how I got into it.
In terms of where you were at with your style at the time, looking at Mick's experience of him being told, draw like Carlos, what was your experience?
But I think in my case, I was part of that sort of clique that grew up on American comics. So we all had collections of DC and Marvel comics, and we were very much more the DC Marvel style people. We less influenced by the Europeans, although I was familiar with quite a lot of them, but I really was trying to ape my childhood heroes like Gil Kane, people like that. So I came at it with having spent 2 years drawing a superhero, because Power Man was an African superhero. I came at it with that sort of tendency to draw in a sort of superhero-y style. But when I saw Mick's work on Dredd, I realised that wasn't going to wash at all. I was just going to have to use that sort of skill set to try to do something a little stranger. So
and that does kind of prefigure one of the questions I was going to ask, which was about kind of cross-pollination, because I know, Mick, you shared a studio with Dave Gibbons, and you used to look at each other's work. In Dave's case, used to properly try and put you off your stroke while you were working.
I used to stand behind him and just sort of look, and then go back and sit down again. It used to unnerve him.
But yeah, I mean, was there any kind of cross-pollination at this time? You know, you both kind of mentioned that, you know, your styles were kind of fluid. That, you know, you were looking at other stuff. How much were you influencing each other, or was it?
Can I ask a question? Mick, I'm assuming that you didn't really come from the American comic fan environment yourself. I know. Were you into?
I liked all sorts of comics, Brian.
Okay. Yeah.
Not that I ever saw it. I remember someone gave me a copy of Blazing Combat when I was about 12.
Was that Warren?
That was a real eye opener for me. Because that was American, wasn't it? But it wasn't anything like Marvel or DC comics.
No. I can't really imagine you were into the superheroes.
And while I'm thinking of it, the first time I met you, we're talking about meeting people, in the office, you said to me, "Do you like comics?" Like I was some sort of Martian or something.
Well, it's because I'd never heard of you. I mean, we all knew each other. We were all we'd all been in these fanzines and everything, you know, Dead Skin, or everybody. We've all been in them. But you were
not me.
No, not you. You were new on the scene.
No, I've never had any friends.
Oh wow! Okay. Well, on that point, I want to move to you, Vin. Did you have any friends?
None. That's why I get into comics.
Well, because you started work for the magazine on Missionary Man, which was I know that Gordon Rennie considers that kind of early Missionary Man stuff not his favourite stuff that he's written. But tell us a little bit about how you came to be on that strip.
I was working in an underground comic, an adult humour comic in Glasgow called Electric Soup. Because we were going to comic marts and selling our comics there, people kept coming up to me and saying you should send samples off to different publishers. And I'd really been into comics when I was younger, and I'd kind of drifted away from them in my teens. So when I started drawing an underground comic, and I was about 20 at the time, I kind of didn't know anything about comics. I had to be reintroduced to them. And so I thought Batman would be a good character to send out to lots of different publishers, because everybody knows Batman, and it was less specific than just doing a war story or a crime story or something. And I didn't have any access. This is pre-internet. I had no access to a script. So I made up a fight and chase 4-page scenario, no words, with Batman in it. And I could not believe how long it was taking. I just couldn't believe how much work was involved. And because I had been drawing kind of cartoony stuff, and I would place the speak bubbles in front of people's bodies, so I didn't have to draw the bodies and stuff. It was just anything goes. I did 3 1/3 pages and photocopied them and sent them off. So I didn't even finish the 4-page pitch that I was doing to try and get work. And the first person that got back to me was Steve McManus. He sent me a Wagner story and said, do me a couple of pages of this in black and white. I did a couple of pages and sent it back to him. No money involved, of course. And he got back to me and said, I love them, but unfortunately I can't give you any work, but I've sent them on to David Bishop. And he basically said, I'll just keep sending you scripts.
Because actually, Vin, similarly to Mick, I remember speaking to a couple of artists. Was that around sort of like 92 or something like that you started? Yeah, about right. Mm-hmm. So I remember the guys in the late 80s after Bisley had come along and started painting comics. And I've spoken to a few artists around that time. I won't name names, but who were specifically told to try and ape Simon's style, And of course, no one can do that. That Simon is completely Simon. And I feel like kind of when you came, because one of the things that I love about 2000 AD most is I feel like it does give people room to be themselves, to have their own style, they have their own take, and it can kind of find a home in its pages.
Similarly, I didn't get that either. When Dave Bishop told me to send in the sample pages, he just told me to do my own thing. He didn't give me any direction, like try and be a bit like Simon or try and let's do something different. I had come from art school. I was in the drawing and painting department, and I loved what Simon was doing. And there was a kind of a generally descending order from Simon at the top down through the ranks of people who I think weren't naturally, who wouldn't have been working in a painted style had they not been encouraged to. What Simon does so much, there's two very different things. There's the insane caricature and cartoon violence that comes from his personality, and there's that kind of Frazetta-influenced painted texture and detail. And I didn't really see any point in trying to do something like Simon, because Simon does what he does better than anybody else. And most people who find their kind of niche, there's no point in other people trying to do the same thing,
Yeah.
But like you, thankfully, I wasn't encouraged to try and work in anybody else's style. I was just sort of doing my own thing, and I was very much feeling my way through it, It wasn't I didn't have an idea about how Missionary Man was going to look before I started. It was it came together partly just because of the way I draw, partly because of my influences, and partly because I was learning how to put a page together as I went along. So it was very much just learning on the hoof.
Jock referenced it a minute ago. W.D. Watkins. Your influences, as you said, you weren't necessarily into comics. What were your influences that kind of came together in your style? Because it's such a clear style. The lines are clear and confident. Growing up, I had a bunch of different British comics, Bullet and Warlord and Hotspur and Beano and all this kind of stuff. I had the Bruins and Oor Willie, of course, from Watkins. I had a few European comics. There was a comic called Seamock, which came out of Spain, I think. Just comic backwards. And it had a selection.
I've got a few of those.
And it had a selection of beautiful, black and white strips, lovely brushwork illustration, and a few fully painted scripts, and a bit of nudity as well. And that was quite an eye opener. I had some old IPC annuals, the Big Book of Legends and stuff like that, with kind of Arthurian kind of tales and beautifully fully painted stuff. I had from holidays in Scotland, in Millport, a wee island just down the Clyde. There was a cafe that had a spinner rack, and it had the black and white Sinister Tales, Eerie Worlds, Weird Science, Tales to Astonish. The coloured cover, black and white interior, and there was Ditko and all sorts of people in there. So it was a real mishmash of stuff. And then when I started working for Electric Soup, there was two other guys that worked. It was a bunch of guys, and most of them were influenced by Viz and hoped to do a kind of Scottish version of Viz, but with more comic and less editorial.
Can I ask a question, Vin? When you were at art school, were you doing fine art? It was a fine art course.
Yeah. I was in the drawing and painting department.
Which art school was that?
Glasgow School of Art.
Okay. And so what sort of stuff were you exposed to in the fine art world at the time?
Well, it was strange. It was a strange time because like most art schools, Glasgow had actually taught students about perspective, anatomy, proportion, composition, and how to use oils, like, thin to fat. Back decades before I went there. And by the time I went, which was mid-80s, there was a completely different approach, and you didn't actually teach people how to do things.
No,
you just let them find their own way. I was very much into Egon Schiele and Andy Warhol and David Hockney. And basically all the artists that I liked were really out of fashion with the tutors. You know, they were all into abstract expressionism and abstraction, which I can really appreciate. It's just not where I was at the time. So I ended up getting chucked out of art school. So my influences were all over the place. And then when I started with Electric Soup, there was a couple of guys who were really into comics. And over a very short period of time, I learned about Brian and Mick's work, about Dave Gibbons, Frank Miller, Mike Mignola, Mobius, Katsuhiro Otomo. It was basically these two guys introduced me to all the artists and writers that they felt were doing great work. And it was a very, very wide mix. And I'd just been introduced to all that stuff when I started working for the magazine. So I was very much right at the start of my reintroduction to comics, and right at the start of learning how to actually make comics.
As a reader at the time, you're not party to these stories and, the different influences and how people come to be working for the prog. Because to me, you and Jock were kind of other ends of a little spectrum that kind of came along in that 90s period where, as Jock has pointed out, it was very much not the fully painted stuff that had come to dominate 2000. Well, not necessarily dominate, but was a significant part of 2000 AD. But much more kind of dynamic, line-based work. Because Jock, your story of how you came to I love your story of how you came to be working for 2000 AD. Do you want to recount it for those of us who don't know?
The physical story of how. It was Steve McManus as well, funnily enough. I live down in Devon now, but I was born in Glasgow where Vin is. And unfortunately, I don't have the accent anymore. It's one of my biggest regrets of my life. But anyway, myself and my good friend Dom Reardon, who lives in Totnes, we met each other when I moved down here about sort of 28 years ago, something like that. And he was the first person I met that was into comics. So by the way, I was always into drawing, and I came to 2000 AD quite late. I think I saw my first issue in about 1986, 87. So I would have been about 14 or 15. And it was 2000 AD that made me I love drawing, but that made me want to draw comics specifically. And I became I just hunted down all the back issues, the early 80s stuff from Mick and Brian. Get slightly off subject here, but I will say I think people in my generation, we now realize how lucky we were to have all these incredible people working on this thing that was on the newsstands at our local newsagents as kind of kids, in a lot of cases, a little bit older for me. And I just couldn't wait every week to go and pick it up and see what was inside. It was it's not even like being into a kind of a specific band. It's like having a really cool record label, and that you can kind of trust all the acts that they sign. That's, to me, sort of 2000 AD has that quality about it. And I was young enough that I didn't know how or why that was happening. And now that I sort of work in it, I can understand that clearly we're all given a certain amount of freedom and, free range to a degree to sort of, indulge ourselves a little bit and enjoy what we're doing and hopefully make kind of good looking work. But when I was younger, I didn't quite have those kind of connections, and it just blew the back of my head off. I was like, I don't know what this is. I love it, and this is now what I want to do. So, it was sort of mid 90s, I think, and myself and Dom, I had long hair and homemade trousers on and a big portfolio of original art under my arm. Because actually, funnily enough, I actually used to do a lot of painting, and my samples at the time were all painted. And we hitchhiked from Devon all the way to Glasgow. We were sort of, we were convinced we could do it in a day. And we were still at Exeter about 11:30 in the morning. And I've got to be honest, at that point, I was like, Dom, hang on a minute. Are we being foolish here? But we made it all the way to Glasgow by about 11:30 at night. And then we met, first we met Glenn Fabry. He was the first person. He was sat there. He had a queue, me and Dom's, with our portfolios. And he basically said, apologies for any younger viewers. He said, why are you showing it to me? Off and make some money. And so someone, we were like 22, something like that, 21, 22. And a big Canadian-American guy called Angus, who I've never met since. But he heard Glenn say that and went to find Steve McManus. And then Steve ended up looking for us, which was, our first convention and our first go at showing our work and trying to get some sort of traction. And Steve came over, was super lovely, as I'm sure you all know, really encouraging. We certainly weren't ready at that point, but he was kind enough to stay in touch. And he sort of ended up phoning on like a Sunday, just to sort of say hello and see how we were getting on, which, again, now I'm a bit older, that's a really classy move for an editor to sort of do that, to have that personal kind of quality. And that meant a lot to us as kind of young, as I'm sure we've all been struggling, had no money, nothing at all. And then occasionally I'd get this call from Steve saying, how you doing? Are you still drawing? Do you still, so he was, without him, it certainly wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't until about 5 years later that I was starting to get a little bit desperate. We'd had our first child, our boy, and I still didn't have any work. To cut another long story short, basically, the night that I thought that for the first time properly, the next day I had an answer phone message from Andy Diggle at 2000 AD offering me my first kind of proper job. But funnily enough, I had been painting, and it was Andy that called, and he just said, "Can you draw 12 pages of Dredd in a month?" And I just said, yeah. I hadn't done any black and white for forever, so that's how it started, and I've never been out of work since. So there we are.
Amazing. Well, I want to come back to Mick, because you mentioned a minute ago that you fairly quickly moved away from trying to imitate Carlos as you'd been asked to your own style. I mean, how quickly did you settle on a style? Because the one thing that I've always thought about your work is that it always seems to be evolving. Each new strip is a new step in a direction. But how quickly did you settle? Like, this is how I'm going to draw. This is how this is going to be the Mick McMahon style.
Oh no, I never have. I don't think. To be honest, especially with the Dreads things, because if you look at it, there is still little Carlos-y bits. Even sort of 10 years after, I think, really. I mean, I can see them, but I suppose maybe other people can. But because, I know some people can't tell the difference, but obviously, to me, the difference is like a sore thumb. But it was an interesting point Vin made, I think, about being taught how to use materials and things, because I did a graphics course and was never taught how to use anything, which I thought would have been like the first thing they'd do. I was seduced by the name Chelsea School of Art, where I should have gone to Watford Technical College, where they did do a proper course that showed you how to use gouache and stuff like that. So all my life, actually, I've just learned on the job with everything, I'm institutionalised, really, because when I spent a few years in computer games, surrounded by people who know how to do stuff, I would never, ever ask anybody anything. I'd just try and figure it out myself, wasting all this time. So if someone can teach you how to do something that will help you work, I think you should always take advantage.
Brian, did you go to any kind of art college?
I spent 5 years in art schools. I did a foundation year in Leicester, 3 years of graphics at Norwich, and 1 year at the Central School, which is now Central St Martin's, I think, is now.
Oh, great.
It's now behind King's Cross Station. And my story isn't, in none of those colleges did anyone know anything whatsoever about comics. I did get taught some sort of technique. I remember being taught how to do arc welding once. It didn't come in very useful at all, but No, and I was taught how to do typography and sort of set that sort of metal, sort of, the metal, what's it called?
Letterpress.
Type.
Metal type, so you can print from it and print a newspaper from it and stuff like that. But learning how to draw comics is something entirely you have to teach yourself. Although in America, I mean, there are whole schools of comics. I mean, the Joe Kubert School, quite a lot of people go doing a kind of apprenticeship. I think Howard Chaykin did one under Gil Kane, I think. So a lot of those guys are taught by their mentor how to do it, but I don't think so much ours.
There are some courses now, I think, but like certainly when I actually didn't get into art college. I did a foundation course, and they could smell the comic. They could smell the comics on me, literally, and they didn't want it. They were just
I don't think my lot wanted anything to do with comics at all. No. But oddly enough, at the UEA, the University of East Anglia, which absorbed my old art school, now does a comics course.
Yeah.
So they haven't invited me to go and visit it or anything like that. Maybe one day I should.
I will say though, we're chatting about learning to do stuff. It's funny how, as you get older, you realise the little things that might have been kind of like helped you along the way. Like Steve, at school, I had an amazing art teacher called Mike Bowman, who was a really brilliant portrait painter, and he would literally put up like a big kind of A2, A1 piece of paper and draw an ear, and that was the lesson. And then next time he drew a nose, and he was good at it. And I realised now, like, that was magic, because I was genuinely, that's what I wanted to sort of figure out how to do. And here was someone showing me what an ear looks like. And I still probably draw ears a little bit like Mike showed me at school. So like that, I've still never learned how to draw an ear. I have no idea what an ear looks like. It's just that I can hardly see mine anyway, but I just do kind of that and a bit like that. And I've never really looked at an ear properly. Oh, I love ears. I'm not saying that I draw particularly good ones, but I will say that, funnily enough, in comics, have a look at the way people draw ears, and there's a lot going on there.
I think you're known for your ear. You're a good ear artist.
I mean, this for me, this does explain an awful lot of the hairstyles of your female characters, Brian. Kind of.
Oh yes, they
straight down over the ears, big bushy hairstyles, just to keep away. But I mean, this is a question for Mick and for Brian. Talking about the lack of someone actually saying, "Well, this is how you do this."
Yeah.
You're both known for your iconic covers, for, particularly your Dredd covers. Mick, 2000 AD, Brian for 2000 AD, but also those wonderful Eagle comics, which the Apex edition, which is thankfully being printed at the moment, has some amazing examples. Is this just an example of you just had the knack, or was it absorbing stuff from the comics you've been reading?
Well, in the case of the Eagle covers, I'll speak briefly. I had the luxury of having read all the stories and enjoyed all the stories, and I was able to see what the best bits in all the stories were. So all the material was there to draw from, to give us some idea of what to put on the cover. Quite often when I'm drawing covers these days, I don't even know what's going on inside the book. So it's very difficult to know what to put on, to make a good cover out of something when you don't know what's going on the inside. But in the case of the Eagle covers, all the good stuff was there. And it was stories that I hadn't drawn in the first place that contained characters, wonderful characters, that we could put on the covers. And it was some of my favorite stuff.
Brilliant. Mick, what about you? What was the secret to a standout cover?
I don't know. I mean, I've never read a book about how to do anything to do with drawing.
No.
And it's just all, it just feels right.
It shows me.
That's why I spent so long faffing on things, because I could spend a week doing a layout for a cover. It's just, or anything really. There's no theory behind it. It's just what feels right. And so I still couldn't explain it really. I mean, I can tell you what's wrong with something I've done, but I couldn't tell you what was right.
That cover of Dredd sitting on the huge throne that's like larger than life over the city is.
Oh, that one, yeah.
That is iconic, isn't it?
That's amazing.
I've swiped that at least 3 times, I think.
I don't know where it comes from, really. It's just, I might even have had a layout off of, was it Robin Smith? He used to do other layouts, didn't he? It might have been him. I don't know.
Actually, Brian and Mick, because to me, those sort of maybe the early 80s were sort of, arguably the strongest time for 2008, or at least when you look at the people that are working on the comic, it's like it's an incredible array of talent. Did you both have any sense that you were doing work that was like, I think even on reflection, it's clearly unique and groundbreaking, but did you have a sense of that at the time, or were you just, I don't know what you're like, but I still just go to the drawing board and try my best all the time. I just sit there and I try and make something that I find interesting, exciting, and et cetera, et cetera. But did you guys have any sense of the sort of, not the magnitude is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? There's some real classic stuff in there that you were both responsible for. And did you get a sense of that at the time, or were you just, doing what you were doing?
I don't think I got a sense of it at the time, really. I don't know about you, Mick.
Well, I used to think that that you were doing some really lovely things, and Kevin as well. But I never used to think I was, to be honest. When I look back at it now, I'm not really keen on any of it, because I was talking with Dave a while back.
Yeah.
And because the standard of art is so high now, that we both figured that if we turned up with our old stuff now, we wouldn't get in at all. We wouldn't wouldn't even get a phone call back. So at the time, I didn't. I thought you, like I said, the other people were doing good things, but I've always found it a struggle. So I
think it's always really just a struggle with yourself and a drawing board and a set of tools. And how the hell am I going to do that thing they've just asked me to draw? You're not thinking this is great or anything.
No. Well, I remember the first.
You possibly have a sense that you've drawn it fairly well, occasionally, but you don't have a sense of where the place it has in history. Or anything.
Yeah.
I do find it really weird to think that all those characters that are now, it sounds a bit like boasty, this, but all those characters like Judge Death, well, I co-created those characters. Where's the royalty checks, eh?
Yeah, Mike.
I'm getting that.
You pay royalties. I don't know where this has come from.
I get very nice royalties. Thank you very much. They've been very kind to me over the years.
What was this drive-by in the middle of the panel? Good God.
So actually, just to, I've actually got one of your original Eagle comic covers, Brian, over here. And Mick, I've got a page from Think as well, which I think is a beautiful era of
Can you hold them up to the camera?
Yeah, I can actually. Yeah.
I never tire of looking at my own artwork.
That's the Mick's page.
Lovely. Yeah. I drew the Angel Gang recently for the Apex edition, and I forgot to include the rat. And I had to say, hey, look, because I sent it in complete, and then I said, hey, I forgot the rat. So there's a version with a rat and a version without a rat. What's your one?
Otto Sump.
Yeah. So that's what became. Is that the original?
It is, yeah. It is. It's pristine.
I should not have let that go. I should have kept it.
It is gorgeous. Brian, if you want it back, let's chat after and we'll try and work something out, because I always feel like the art should be with the artist, really. But it's funny because my work's quite. I like throwing ink around, making a bit of a mess, and this is just, it's so beautiful and pristine, and yours as well. It's like I adore stuff that's kind of. Was he a Ron Smith character? Would Ron have? Yeah, that's right.
For the first time, yeah, it's got a bit of a Ron Smith kind of look to it, isn't it?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the period that you were working for 2000 AD, and in Vin's case, the magazine kind of meant for your wider careers, because we've essentially got two different British invasions here. Mick and Brian, yours was the 1980s. Vin and Jock, yours was the kind of 1990s into the 2000s. I wanted to get a sense of what 2000 AD meant and what it had taught you about comics. Mick, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's in my head, it's like just a solid foundation I've got. Where I was exposed to, all those different art that was in there. I mean, the thing I thought about the comic was that the fact that I could draw Judge Dredd and Brian, and people didn't moan about the difference.
That's interesting. Yes,
to me was the sort of the bedrock of the comic, because it meant any strip could then be drawn by all different people in different styles, and it wouldn't be sort of, there's no sort of purist approach, which I thought was great. Which I think that's why I always had trouble working with publishers who had a house style or something that I never felt comfortable. I didn't really feel I fitted in. So in a way, it's held me back working for 2018, because I had to I suppose, like you were saying earlier on, you could more or less do what you liked. And no one ever said, don't do it like that, ever.
Brian, what's your thoughts?
That's true. I suppose over the years you look at it and there isn't a house style, and it is very tolerant. And what Mick said, that the readers of Judge Dredd are quite happy to see your work, Mick, and my work, and Ron Smith and all the others, without somehow being jarring for them. Whereas a lot of I've worked for a long time in American comics, there is very much a house style at Marvel and DC, or the sort of has been. But I think, Vin, you've come along and reimagined Superman. Are we allowed to talk about another company in this broadcast? But haven't you? You've completely reimagined him. I can still see that figure of him sitting sort of hunched
on the cloud.
Is that what he's? I can remember the figure. I can't remember what he's sitting on. I haven't got a picture in front of me. But
he's sitting on a cloud, looking down through a gap in the clouds at Metropolis.
Yes.
And
there's a wonderful calmness to your work, which I love. I mean, a lot of comic, they all want action. Often when I do a cover, I say, well, what is it you want? And they say, do an action shot. And I sort of think, well, what the fuck are they doing? But I love the. Is it unfair to say that your work has a calmness about it in places?
No, I think when I started out, I, like a lot of young artists, I was much more drawn towards drawing action. And if I had talking heads sitting round a table eating a meal, or walking down a street, it wasn't as interesting to draw, which made it more of a challenge to make it interesting to look at. It's important to try and make the quiet moments in a story just as important as the louder or faster moments in the story, because it's very much part of the same thing.
I think when I first saw your work, I was impressed by the open spaces you left in the panels. It was the figures were often quite small in the panel as a whole. Quite a lot of negative space going on there. Would you say so?
Yes, often. Yeah. I did a Lobo story that Alan Grant wrote, and it was never published. And Dan Raspler was the editor, and I sent the pages in, Blue Line, 24 pages, and when he got back to me, to his credit, he wrote me a letter, like maybe 8 or more pages typed.
Really?
Panel by panel, page by page, going through what I had done and what I should maybe have thought of doing. And as an example, there was a 3-page fight scene with Lobo and a guy who was bigger than him. And it was basically no weapons. It was a boxing match. And I had drawn the whole thing from one fixed viewpoint. So it was like if you were sitting in the crowd watching a boxing match, and I'd worked it all out. And he wrote to me and he said, I can see that somebody's throwing a right hook, so they're leading in with the left foot, and then they lead in with the right foot for the left hook. And he said it all worked beautifully and you could make it into a flick book. He said, but this is a Lobo comic and it just doesn't work. He said, once you start with an establishing shot, so you know who the two people are and where they are, when the first punch is thrown, the second punch can be a close-up with a tooth coming out. It'll still make sense. tilt the camera, and he kind of, so on the one hand, there is naturally a sense of calm, but at the same time, I had taken that too far. And for a comic like Lobo, which is meant to be kind of energetic and anarchic, it kind of didn't work. But also, it's funny, I haven't actually picked up Jock's latest Batman stuff, but I've seen some online, and there's this beautiful shot of Batman, like kind of in midair across the city, and he's a tiny figure, and the buildings, the cityscape is massive, and you get this amazing sense of like a human being in a costume, miles up in the air, in amongst all these huge buildings. And there's something to be said for playing with scale and playing, using close-ups and using distance shots, using calm, well-composed shots with frenetic, energetic shots. And I think sometimes, depending on the story, that mixture can really help. If everything's frenetic all the time, if everybody's constantly gritting their teeth even when they're eating their breakfast, it kind of loses its power.
It's something that always struck me about Jock's early stuff, that there's a kind of like a febrile tension going on, in the way that you constructed figures and the way that people stood and moved. There was always a sense of movement to it. And I know we talked a number of years ago about injecting dynamism into situations. I mean, how is that, looking at your early Dredd work and the stuff you're producing now, how did that, those early stories kind of, what did they teach you about how your style was going to develop and how to do comics?
The one thing, 2000 AD, I think I touched on it earlier, I did feel like that I could just do it my way, whatever my way was going to be. I sort of tried to kind of just follow that through. And looking at the early stuff, I mean, I cringe, as I'm sure we all do, at our early work. And there's lots there's lots that I don't like about it. But I think I was certainly kind of hungry for it. I wanted it to be something and to be good and have some kind of character, because I feel like comics is one of the few, well, that's not true actually, I was going to say one of the few remaining kind of art forms where you still can have quite a lot of personality and still be and be published, have the big two, whatever and that feels quite special actually. Like that, again, as I've got older, I realize that I'm really pleased that I'm doing this thing, because I'm not sure how I'd fare, having to just sort of fit in with other things. And luckily, I've that's always been my approach. And luckily, I've gone on to work at for DC and Marvel, and gone on to work on movies and stuff as well, which was never the plan. It's just there seems to be something about, I feel that, and I'd say certainly with the three guys I'm sat with here, that when you do have your own take on something, that's actually the real currency. That's the thing that people enjoy, and that's the feeling that you get from the personality in these three's drawings is it feels like magic, and that's always been what I love about comics. Is it's very personal. It's a very personal experience when you read them, and it has room for personality, and a really strong personality. It's normally only a few people making one, or or one person, a writer, artist, making it, and that feels very pure to me. And the world gets more and more diluted, and there's so much stuff out there, and that's always been my approach. Whether I've always been successful is another matter, but that's always been my approach. And 2000 AD absolutely cemented that in me and made me think, okay, if these guys are doing it, maybe I can do it as well. And that's always been what I've tried to kind of chase.
Vin, I wanted to ask you, you look at your work on Missionary Man and particularly on Shimura as well, where for me that's a harbinger of things to come. You've got so many elements there that have kind of stayed with you. Did you get a sense of that? Would you get a sense of that now? Kind of like, well, this is where I put down my foundations. This is where I worked out what Frank Quitely artwork was gonna look like.
No, it's funny because I don't often look at my previous work. I do occasionally, particularly on the rare occasions where I kind of tidy up my studio, or I'm doing one of these once a decade clear outs, and sometimes I'll flick through things that I've done, or occasionally they'll send me something collected in a new format and I haven't looked at it for a while. And I'm always struck by things that I see that I think, oh, why didn't I make more of an effort with that? Or why didn't I do it the way you see all the mistakes that young artists make when they don't have much experience and they already feel they've spent too much time in the page. There's not a page I've done where I couldn't, if I had to redo it, I couldn't make it better. Not a single page. But when I look at older work, I always see lots and lots of things that I would do better now. But I do occasionally see things and think, oh, I'm still kind of doing that. Or, I remember how happy I was when I worked out how to do that or whatever, But I don't know why, but I just don't often go back and look at my older work.
Because you've never actually done any work directly for the prog itself. Did you go back to McManus and say, I'd like to work there or have ambitions to draw there? Or was it very much kind of the move to other publishers happened, as Bishop predicted, happened quite quickly?
I think it took a few years, but I was really happy working at the magazine. And it wasn't Dredd strips that I was doing, it was Missionary Man and Shimura. I did some Dredd covers for Classic 2000 AD, and I really enjoyed doing that. But and I had done a bunch of Dredd samples for myself before I did those 3 1/3 pages of Batman, which I never sent off. I only sent the Batman stuff. And funnily enough, I remember doing a couple of pieces of Dredd stripped to the waist, fighting a gladiator in an arena with sand and dust getting kicked up, which I'm quite embarrassed about now. And I don't know if I've still got it or not.
I was just about to say, please tell me this still exists, because a Frank Quitely Apex edition with Dredd stripped to the waist, I think that would be.
I mean, he still had his helmet on, of course, but but he was fighting a gladiator. It was ridiculous. But
have you ever drawn him without his helmet?
No, I have not.
No, I have.
Have you? What does he look like? Did you have a crazy hairdo?
Well, it was a convention, and some kid said, "Will you draw Dredd without the helmet?" So I said, "Okay." So I just drew him up to the bit where the helmet is, and then there was no helmet or anything.
Mick, this is a bit of a random question, but one of the things I always loved about your work is the bizarre clothes. Talking about people with helmets and not helmets, always the fantastic clothes that Mega City One. One thing that people always talk about with 2000 AD is, it's punk. It's the spirit of punk. And I think it might have been Pat who said, well, none of us were punks. That everybody had long hair, apart from Mick McMahon, who had like spiky hair and a leather jacket. And I just wonder if, all these Mega City One citizens running around with big boots and crazy clothes, whether this was you projecting yourself onto making Mega City One in your own image.
No, I wasn't a punk.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. That was I didn't have spiky hair. It stood up a little bit. I think that might have been sort of scared from the first time meeting Pat Mills. It was the era of punk, wasn't it?
It was.
And I just felt natural to do that kind of stuff, really.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, I didn't want to be a punk. And I remember the character Spikes Harvey Rotten was supposed to be a punk, but he wasn't anything like a punk at all. It's like, really.
He always struck me as kind of, what's the, when the Sex Pistols went on to, that infamous interview on TV.
Bill Grundy.
Bill Grundy.
Yeah.
I always felt Spikes Harvey Rotten was like a the image of a punk that like a middle class person who'd watched that show and was like, that's what punks are like.
That's exactly what he looked like. Oh, it's really good. So, no, it's I think what struck me as well about that kind of stuff was that Pat used to stick that stuff in to try and make the comic seem modern, I think, or relevant or whatever. But it was almost like it did it with other stuff as well. So it wasn't trying to make it a punk comic or anything like that. It was just like perhaps like a magpie who collects stuff.
I always loved the names of the blocks. You'd have the Rita Tushingham block or the Martina Navratilova block, and they were people from the past, really, in a way, weren't they? Even then, sort of odd reference.
Didn't it? It started quite late, though, didn't it? Naming the blocks.
Did it?
Yeah, I think so. It must have been.
Relative, I think the earliest one I can think of is City Block, which was a strip that Brian, which was the Rita Tushingham and Ernest Borgnine blocks.
Yes. God.
What was there? Was there a Ron Smith one, like Charlton Heston block or something?
That's yes, of course. Yeah. No, you're right. The Charlton Heston block.
Feels quite early on.
Yeah, for City Block, which was post. Was that post Cursed Earth?
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I don't want to sound too nerdy, but I think it was around about the early 100s.
But the names were always of people who had sort of slightly faded already by then.
Yeah.
Well, I did one in one of the annuals, and it was I had to redraw the whole thing. Well, not quite a lot of it, because it was the Jimmy Clitheroe block, and I had one of those spirally roads. Broke the word Clitheroe in exactly the wrong place.
Wait, the reason I brought up the whole kind of clothing thing, which is Dredd in particular. I know Vin, you didn't work it, but you kind of worked on the wider world. Very early on, this became a sandbox. That strip in particular became a sandbox that anybody. We kind of touched on this already. Everybody could play in. Where you are now, the style that you have now. This is a question for all of you. How much of a debt that owes to having that sandbox to play in, to be able to go, actually, I'm going to make all this up.
Well, yeah, because although they're paying you to do it, you're your own boss, aren't you? Mm. Basically, I mean, unless you do it really badly, then no one would ever say, "Oh no, it's bad, it's wrong." Because if there's so many approaches to it already being done, then you can't be wrong, can you? It's, unless you sort of screw up the actual sort of drawing or something. But no, I think what it meant for me anyway was that whenever I went to do something like work on a film or whatever, it gave me the confidence just to be me rather than worrying what they want. Yeah, because that's always when you're starting off working for new people, you can fall into the thing where you end up doing what they think they want. When they see it, it isn't what they want. So you just got to have the confidence, and that's what I got from 2000 AD. I think that you can just sort of go off at a tangent, and no one would ever say anything. So, which is nice.
I think your furthest out that I can remember by you, Mick, was the Howler story.
Yeah,
right. I love that. I thought, God, look at this stuff. Yeah. I mean, back in the early days when I was walking over, what was that bridge? Farringdon Bridge? Was that the bridge that we walked over?
Is it Holborn? Is it? No, you're Blackfriars.
Well, I lived in Holborn, but
Blackfriars Bridge. You had to cross the river to get
Blackfriars Bridge. That's right. Yeah. It was on Farringdon Street. That's when down to Kingsreach Tower, where 2000 AD was at the time. I remember the people there: Kev O'Neill, Jan Shepherd.
Yeah, Jan.
And I remember the occasions when your artwork had turned up, and we were all always astonished. This is me getting all sort of dewy-eyed here, but always astonished by the new step you had taken with your work. We were always really, really struck by it. I don't know quite why I brought that up.
I love that about 2000 AD, that you guys were doing this just insanely beautiful work. You know, you mentioned Judge Death earlier, Brian, as well. Like, I mean, come on, you know, it's just like, it's incredible stuff. And to have that as a younger person, you know, I literally felt like I was getting it sort of like a rocket, well, the Diggle quote, like a shot of rocket fuel kind of thing. It just felt, it completely blew my brains. And you're responsible for me being sat here. So thank you, I think.
Just doing our job.
The comic.
Yeah.
It was a question I was going to ask was about this kind of the 2000 AD American comics pipeline that, you know, the way a lot of people talk about it now is kind of, is almost like a given that this happens, that, you know, the Americans swoop in and it's not long before people go off. But all of you have got slightly different experiences of that process and you know, slightly different careers.
Well, I think Karen Berger's Vertigo at DC. I mean, she sucked in a lot of the British. It was, Vertigo was very much not like an American comic. It was very much. Somebody said it's the comic where all the whining Brits go to work.
Someone also said it was a whole line of comics based on a bad mood Alan Moore had 25 years ago.
Yeah, that would work. Yeah. But I don't know whether nowadays there is that brain drain so much nowadays. Is that? I'm not aware that there's a whole part of an American company that is drawing in a lot of us Brits.
I think they're still aware. I mean, you know, I still feel like I'm new at this, but actually, I started 20 years ago, and it was Karen Berger that met me, and she said, "Oh, your job," you know. So she knew who I was, and she'd obviously sort of seen what I was doing. I never wanted to really deliberately do that because I love 2000 AD, and as Mike knows, I'll always try and do something for 2000 AD if I can. You know, I'm not a fan of the sort of slightly cynical idea that, if I do this for a couple of years, then maybe I'll get there. Because I think it's far more important just to do the thing you're doing time well, and then that's where the opportunities come from, kind of thing. And certainly that was my sort of idea about things. But yeah, it was Karen for me. Vin, was it? I guess that's around that time as well. Was it Karen as well?
Yes, it was indeed. Yeah, it was when Vertigo had a UK office.
Oh yeah.
Who
was working at the time? Who was working in that office in the UK?
It was Art Young.
Art Young, I remember Art. Yes.
Tim Pilcher and Helen. I can't remember Helen's second name.
Okay. Somebody told me that Art Young, as an American, ended up writing EastEnders or something.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I heard too. He was a script editor, I think.
Was he?
I think so, yeah.
I knew him really rather well because I was drawing Animal Man covers for him at the time, and we were quite good pals. And I've never seen him since.
I think he came over to wine and dine British artists and writers, and I'm sure he ran up some gigantic expenses, and then ended up working for television. I think I met Art a few times, and he really seemed to be enjoying himself over here. But I went down to, it must have been, I don't know if it was 91 or 92 or 93 or what it was. I guess it was probably 92 or 93. I went down to one of the London conventions. I think it was still in the Bloomsbury Crest at the time.
Yep.
And I couldn't afford to stay there. I was staying in student accommodation in Golders Green or somewhere like that. And Karen Berger was staying in the Russell Square Hotel.
That's
she had a suite, and she had instead of going to the con, she sat in her suite with Art Young fussing around her, and they had a schedule for inviting British artists and writers up for little kind of interviews. And I was invited to, after working at the magazine for a few years, I was invited to go up and show my work and have a chat, and and that's when I first started working for Vertigo.
And by the way, if Karen happens to be watching, hello, Karen.
Yes, hello, Karen.
Mick, what about you did some Batman stuff, right? But that was kind of...
No, that was the only thing I did, really, wasn't it? I did it because Archie Goodwin, he's probably the only guy there that would give me any work, so because he liked what I did. But no, that was... The Batman movies had started coming out, and the Batman books were selling like huge numbers.
Because of this movie, Karen and Art coming over, finding this talent to take over. It was Vertigo, whether it was kind of mainstream American comics. Do you think that has had a lasting impact on comics? Can we still feel the effects of that British invasion? Not just the obvious thing like DC is still doing like Watchmen tie-ins and things like that, but more the kind of the feel of comics, the way that the comics work on the page artistically. Do you think 2000 AD is still having an effect?
Personally, I think the internet has changed the landscape. I personally think for the better. I think there's amazing young artists coming up doing incredible things that as they should be as a new generation. But I would still say that 2000 AD has a really solid part because of all the people that did go on to work for DC and Marvel and arguably some of the biggest names in comics. That DNA is all. It must have had an effect, and I would say so. I mean, it's 45 years later, and here we are, kind of celebrating it. It's and again, like I was saying, trying to sort of explain earlier, there was something just about it that had a huge effect on an awful lot of people.
One of the things I wanted to add, because I realised we've been talking for quite a while, but one of the things I did want to ask about was we focused very much on what you've done. I wanted to ask about what you haven't but would have liked to have done. Is there a moment? Is there a character? Is there a story that you wish you'd done, that you would like to do in terms of 2000 AD and its galaxy of characters?
I'd quite like to draw Noam Chomsky.
Paging PJ, he'll be so pleased to hear that. By the way.
Vin, what about you? Because your time with us was relatively short. Is there something you would like to have done?
I would have kind of liked to have done a Dredd strip at some time.
I think we'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that
for sure.
Who knows? Who knows what the future will bring?
We'll clear the schedule. Whatever you want to do, just let us know. Mick, what about you? Because I mean, you've had such a career at 2000 AD with so many different styles. Was there something that you wish you had done?
No, I think I mentioned at the beginning when I went to see the editor at Battle Picture Library, Mr. Bensberg. I was really keen to draw one of his war comics. That was all I wanted to do. And when I got to do Dredd, which is something like totally unexpected, the idea of doing a war comic just completely vanished. And so ever since then, I've never, ever felt the need or want to do a particular character. I always found it much better to be asked to do things that I'd never heard of. That I have to because it's always a struggle then. So if you can make something out of it, then it's almost like self-indulgence, I think, doing things that you really want to do. There's an element of punishment about it. So it sort of cracks the whip to make you do a better job than you probably would have done if it's something that you think you know how to do.
Jock, what about you?
The only regret I have, I think, is just I didn't do that many Dredd stories, and they tend to be small little one-offs or whatever. And I wish I had done a more substantial Dredd story, like maybe not 26 episodes or whatever Carlos drew of the Apocalypse War, but to just a bit more of a substantial story. I've got such an affinity for Dredd, really, and I was in 2000 for 2 or 3 years, early on, and luckily they've always asked me to do, if there was kind of like some sort of random promo thing, they'd ask me to do a Dredd, or if it was kind of, I just wish I had done a bit of a longer Dredd story, really.
Thank you so much for this. This has been such a pleasure to hear you all talk and your different stories of working for 2000 AD and beyond. So just on behalf of everyone, thank you for taking the time to chat. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And nice to meet you all too.
Yeah.
And good night.